Good morning, it's 9 o'clock and you're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Today is Budget Day and we have a stellar lineup of MPs and experts to make you sure you're informed about what's going on in Westminster today and how it will affect us all. We'll also have time to explore why Bradford Council has been accused of sweeping the issue of child sexual exploitation under the carpet for reasons of political correctness. All that and more in just a few minutes, but first, here's your news.
Well, good morning. I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 9 o'clock. Rising wages, more NHS funding and regional transport investment. That and more will be revealed in the budget this afternoon. Rishi Sunak will announce a stronger UK economy of the future. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent body forecasting budget spending, is expected to increase its growth outlook for 2021 and cut unemployment predictions. The former Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, told GBNews he wants reassurance this government will be fiscally responsible.
Don't know what the future holds. Small increases in interest rates can make a big impact on the public finances. So I think striking that right balance as the economy grows between investing in the public services and protecting those people who are on lower incomes with maintaining fiscal responsibility and the government's reputation for managing the public finances prudently.
NHS Test and Trace has failed its main objective to enable people to return to normal life and risks wasting public money. That's according to MPs. A report by the Public Accounts Committee criticises the government's handling of what they call the eye-watering sums of money spent on it. Test and Trace has cost £37 billion in the past 2 years. The committee say it hasn't worked. They report that only 14% of nearly 700 million lateral flow tests actually had their results reported. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters will be sent out this week, inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Vaccines have been available for this age group in schools in England since September, but since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs through the National Booking Service for their local sites. More than half of UK university staff have shown probable signs of depression. It's according to a poll by the charity Education Support. It reveals that 53% of the staff surveyed in March of this year showed signs of depression. 59% feared they would be seen as weak if they sought support. Some of the factors included a move to online teaching and the pressures of the pandemic. The Queen will not attend the COP26 Climate Change Summit. The monarch was due to travel to Scotland on Monday, but now will video record a speech later this week that will be played out to delegates. A palace spokesman said that Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception. The Queen is following medical advice to rest and carry out only light duties and remains in good spirits. A prosecutor says criminal charges are possible in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer on the set of the film Rust. The set electrician Sergei Svetnoy shared this picture of Helena Hutchins on set, standing there in front of Alec Baldwin in a white beanie. Hutchins was killed when the Hollywood actor Alec Baldwin accidentally shot her while rehearsing. Investigators were told Baldwin believed the gun did not contain live ammunition. Santa Fe County District Attorney told the New York Times everything at this point, including criminal charges, is on the table. The attorney and county sheriff are holding a press conference later today. Water companies will now have a legal duty to reduce the impact of sewage discharges from storm overflows. Last week, the government voted against an amendment that would hold water firms legally responsible for polluting waterways. Well, public anger and the House of Lords backing the amendment forced a government U-turn. Farming and meat industry bosses have warned that labour shortfalls could result in a shortage of turkeys in the UK for Christmas. Bosses warned MPs that produce may have to be imported from Europe. Graham Deere, chairman of the British Poultry Council, said that around 90% of our shortages are in the processing plants, as non-UK workers leaving during the pandemic contributed to a shortfall in staff numbers.
We have been given access through the seasonal worker scheme for up to 5,500, but that finishes on the 31st of December. We would have loved to have known about that in June, in which case we could have placed enough turkeys to be able to deliver a full Christmas.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with the headlines at 9:30. For now, let's go to the briefing with Tom.
Welcome to the briefing. This morning we're taking a deep dive into today's budget with some really stellar guests. But first, here's how today will pan out. At 10:45, Rishi will hold his red box aloft in the Chancellor's traditional budget photo op outside number 11. At midday, we'll bring you Prime Minister's questions live here on GB News. And at 12:40, the Chancellor will deliver his budget. We have special programming with all the reaction and analysis you can get your hands on at this big fiscal event. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor are then to head off to a brewery after the budget, potentially hinting at some good news around alcohol duty. Well, before all of that takes place, and to try and make sense of it all and go through some of the challenges and opportunities of this budget, I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, who can join us now from College Green outside the Houses of Parliament. Mark, what are you expecting in this budget this afternoon?
Well, Tom, I don't think there's now going to be very many surprises. To the near fury of the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, it seems that nearly all of the budget has been drip-fed to one newspaper or another over recent days. Oftentimes the Chancellor holds something back to pull a rabbit out of the hat, as they call it, really giving proof to the thing, to the slogan that the budget is now really a conjuring trick rather than a fiscal event. We're pulling rabbits from hats rather than really adding up numbers properly on a spreadsheet. You might be right. I think that there's going to be a relaxation in beer duty or alcohol duty of some sort. But overall, what we can expect, Tom, is the Chancellor to spend a lot of money that, frankly, he doesn't have. We've seen £7 billion promised for local infrastructure projects. We've seen another £6 billion promised for the National Health Service. The public sector pay freeze looks like that's going to come to an end. Inflation's kicking in, so we might see public sector pay next year go up. Who knows, 2, 3, 4, 5%. I think we're going to see an awful lot of money spent. And if there is that little bit of good news on alcohol duty, I expect that to really be probably the only meaningful tax cut that the Chancellor brings forward. So if you're a low tax, balance the books and don't overspend kind of guy like I am, Tom, I think you're probably in for a disappointing day.
This is interesting. 37 billion is the number, I think, that has already been pledged. An extraordinary amount of money, given that we are in a time of unprecedented debt emerging from a crisis. I wonder, though, there have been some reports in the papers this morning that the Chancellor wants to build a bit of a war chest, something designed in case interest rates rise, something that could be deployed to ensure that no spending has to be cut back. However, if those interest rates stay low, that could be the manoeuvre, that could be the room for tax cuts coming into running up to the next election.
I think, Tom, that's right. Although I'm rather sceptical about the government borrowing money, certainly on the scale that it's been borrowing in recent years, it is true to say that that borrowing is a lot easier when interest rates are low. If interest rates stay low, particularly with the present fiscal picture, the Chancellor has considerably more room for manoeuvre, either for yet more spending because he can borrow at a low rate, or, as you rightly say, for tax cuts, because he can then could still sustain the ongoing debt and deficit rather more easily. But I think that's a rather optimistic outlook, if I might say so, Tom. I think that interest rates are going to start to tick back up. I don't think there'll be a dramatic hike in the next 2, 3, 4 months, but over the next 2, 3, 4 years, one might presume that interest rates will return to normal, something around the 5% mark perhaps, rather than the 0% we've got at the moment. Doubly true if inflation kicks in. Interest rates are supposed to be the lever that is pulled to combat inflation. If we see inflation rising, interest rates surely will go up in lockstep with that. So if the Chancellor's hoping for prevailing low interest rates for this war chest of his, he may be very, very disappointed. I wish we had built up a war chest over the past 10 or 15 years, but it's actually been 20 years now, Tom, 20 years since any Chancellor last proposed a balanced budget to the House of Parliament just behind me here. 20 years since we last ran a surplus. Every year since, the government has spent more money than it has brought in tax, and that certainly is not going to change this afternoon.
It is an extraordinary statistic. 20 years, a generation where the UK has never balanced a single budget, although I suppose the government would say that the current budget was balanced, just not infrastructure spend just a few years ago before the pandemic. I wonder now what the government can do to try and build confidence in terms of overseas investment and in terms of a public who, according to several opinion polls, now no longer see the Conservative Party as a low-tax party.
Yeah, well, I think the solution there, and I hope we'll hear a bit of it from the Chancellor today, although I'm not very hopeful in this year's budget in terms of what he's going to present for the next 12 months. But, Tom, I hope we hear a bit more about the medium to longer term. Even a fiscal hawk like me can forgive the government for spending a lot of money at a time of crisis. Inevitably, in a pandemic, a bit like a war, the government leaves with a battering on its spreadsheet, with a huge hole in its public finances. And I'm not expecting the Chancellor to render that good overnight or today. But I would like to hear from him that over the next 2 or 3 years, he's determined to get back to balanced budgets, that's the trajectory he's headed in. And I think there would need to be some, if you like, statistical and numerical proof of that, Tom, not just the Chancellor saying that by instinct he's a balanced books kind of guy, by instinct he's a low tax kind of guy. We need to actually judge him by his actions. So I hope that we hear a lot from him about, even if we're not balancing the books now, is he aiming to do so by 2024, 2025, at some point in the relatively near term? Because if governments continue to spend money, hand over fist, that they don't really have, you're quite right, Tom, to imply that the markets get jittery. The markets realise that the position is unsustainable over the long run. So I think Rishi Sunak today needs to give some sort of pledge over the long run, and some sort of plausible pledge too, if we want Britain to remain as a very desirable place to do business and invest.
Certainly huge challenges ahead, potentially opportunities too. We will await with interest to see what happens in that budget, and if it is correct that just about everything has been said already. Hopefully there are some rabbits. That's what we hope for here on this news channel. But Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, thank you so much for your insight and analysis this morning. A really interesting story. Well, let's get another perspective on the budget now. I'm delighted to be joined by the Labour MP Siobhan McDonough, who is also a member of the Treasury Select Committee. Welcome to the programme, Siobhan. What are you expecting the Chancellor to say later today?
Well, we've had a lot of it trailed in the press over the last few days, so we wonder how much there really is that is going to be a surprise. But, you know, the devil is always in the detail. You know, whether it's yesterday's announced ending of the public pay freeze, which isn't quite what it seems, because perhaps those increases will be paid out of current budgets, so will actually mean cuts to services, whether the pay rise will actually be at inflation or above. All these things, as you know, Tom, as a seasoned watcher of these things, the devil is always in the detail.
And I suppose we won't really get that detail at the time of the announcement. It will be in the hours following the budget that will start to leak out. In previous years, actually, it's been a budget that potentially was well received on the day. As soon as we get into sort of the next day, the next few days, maybe even the next week, some people discover some less desirable parts of it. I wonder if this is a budget sort of mid-term where the government is willing to take more tough decisions. This seemed to be a government that runs in terms of looking at focus groups and opinion polls and always wanting to be popular. Do you think this is a Chancellor who's willing to take tough decisions when he needs to?
I'm I mean, he may be prepared to take tough decisions, but don't think his next door neighbour at number 10 is really prepared to make tough decisions. So that's the problem, and we know that tension exists between Rishi Sunak being cautious on borrowing and the Prime Minister not quite so cautious and given to announcing schemes like a royal yacht or whatever. So we'll see. But I think you're absolutely right. It's a kind of thought that, budgets that go down well on the day tend to unravel later. And what we're also seeing is re-announcements, telling us about increase in spending, which have been announced perhaps 3, 4, maybe even 5 times previously. So those are all sorts of things to watch for. I'm just really worried that it's going to be a very long, cold winter for a lot of people in my constituency. I'm getting on the doorsteps a lot of concerns about increasing gas and electricity bills, people who go to work but have their income topped up by universal credit, the increase in the minimum wage to £9.50 is very welcome. But if that's combined with a £20 a week cut in your universal credit, you still come out worse off.
I've got to say, business rate cuts, opposing the national insurance increase, now proposing VAT cuts. The Labour Party's sounding more Thatcherite on economics these days than the Conservative Party. Have you just swapped clothes with each other and the Chancellor now seems to be sort of this big state, high tax, high spend individual, and the Labour Party seeming potentially more fiscally rigorous?
Well, as Gordon Brown would have told you during his period as Chancellor, there's no problem with fiscal rigour, but you do have to be fair in your decisions, and those decisions shouldn't hurt those who have least disproportionately, and that's what we're going to see with the national insurance increases. I think some carers agency, somebody who runs a carers agency that I was talking to was telling me that they thought the increase in national insurance alone would be an additional cost of a month's salary to one of their carers. So you do have to be very aware of who you're impacting.
No, it's a really thorny issue. All of these issues, huge challenges to come. Thank you so much for your analysis this morning, Siobhan. It's something that no doubt we will keep returning to. I am interested in this sort of modern-day amalgamation of the parties. Are the two parties closer together? Or potentially, on tax, is the Labour Party going a little bit further than the Conservative?
Can I tell you, the Labour is the party of business, and particularly small business.
Well, on that note, Siobhan McDonough, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. No doubt we will explore those issues more and more as the days go on. And of course, I think Siobhan was absolutely right there. The devil will be in the detail. Well, let's listen to some of what the Chancellor might be saying later today. An economy of higher wages, higher skills, rising productivity, of strong public services, vibrant communities and safer streets. An economy fit for a new age of optimism. A new age of optimism. Those are the words that Chancellor Rishi Sunak will use later today to describe what he hopes will come of his budget. But how true will those words ring? Prices are rising, not least energy prices, as we approach winter. Skills gaps may mean shortages in some sectors. Inflation may eat away at our savings, and new taxes are set to bite our incomes. The British economy is weighted down by trillions in debt, the risk of real interest rate rises, inflation fears, and growth that has not yet taken us back to the position we were in back in February 2020. Not that replacement growth itself will be enough. Simply reverting back to the low growth trend of previous years will not be enough to pay down those gargantuan pandemic costs. Materially higher growth is needed to pay down our debt. A huge challenge for the Chancellor. But this is not all doom and gloom. While the challenges are vast, there is now the chance to rise to them. A chance for the Chancellor to instil confidence in the UK economy, put meaning behind his assertion that he really is a low-tax Tory. And let me be clear, while the economic outlook is tough compared to many other countries in the world, we're in a much stronger position. We have opportunities that Brexit has afforded us, both to liberalise our domestic economy and overseas to pivot our trade to the growth markets of the world. The strength of our vaccine rollout too has enabled Britain to have one of the most open and free societies anywhere in this part of the world. And that fact has reportedly led to an upgrading of growth expectations. There is good news out there. The challenge is to both sustain it and capitalise upon it. Real levelling up will not be achieved through simple cash transfers. Handouts don't work. Taking money away from one person to give to another is not levelling up, it's levelling down. Levelling up comes when the growth potential of left-behind areas is unlocked, allowing them to rise not by penalising areas of success, not by pulling others down, but allowing areas to lift up. Growth politics, not tax and spend. Well, the Chancellor has a lot to think about. Given the scale of the challenges, I can almost forgive him for his attire in number 11 last night. Look under the table here. Socks and sandals? Really? Not content with tanks on Labour's lawn, Rishi is now treading on Lib Dem toes. Socks and sandals. As with so much the Treasury is getting up to, if there hadn't been a pandemic, there really would be no excuse. Well, it's not all about the budget. There is other news too. Child exploitation allegations in West Yorkshire should be investigated by an independent inquiry. That's the contention of Robbie Moore, Conservative MP for Keighley, who I'm delighted to say joins me in the studio now and who held a debate on this very issue last night in Parliament. Why is now the time to bring up this debate?
Because it is absolutely right that we bring this issue of child sexual exploitation, of grooming gangs to the forefront. It has been swept under the carpet for far too long, Tom. And earlier this summer, there was a very damning review, light, limited review that was released that only looked at 5 children that had been sexually abused, that had experienced horrific child sexual exploitation over the last 20 years. And this concluded that there is still an unknown quantity of perpetrators that remain out there unchallenged, and there are still children at risk within the Bradford district. And that is why I am calling for a full Rotherham-style review looking at child sexual exploitation across the Bradford district.
And I'm sure everyone will remember those stories of Rotherham back almost 7 years ago now, when sort of it was all uncovered. It was political correctness that was holding back councils from really investigating a problem that was going on within one particular community. Are those problems of political correctness still holding us back in terms of uncovering evil that's going on?
Well, I think in these circumstances, you have to be very sensible about the narrative that you're wanting to portray, but you can't get away from what the common denominator factor is. And if you are looking at the facts, across the Bradford district, across Keighley, the town which I represent, it has been a minority of Pakistani Muslim men that have targeted young children over the past decades. And it is absolutely unfair on that Pakistani community to be branded with the same accusation. And to get to grips with this issue, in my mind, you have to be frank and have these open conversations, because it is only fair and right on those victims, but also on the whole of our community. And this isn't a race issue. This is not about pitching communities against each other. It is about having a sensible, honest conversation.
Absolutely, and that conversation has to highlight that there is one particular community that there seems to be a problem of. Not people of a race, but people of one particular country of origin. It seems very peculiar that this is something that still is going on and still has not yet been tackled. Why is the council not listening to your calls?
Well, I'm incredibly frustrated that Bradford Council, our new West Yorkshire Mayor, Tracy Brabin, is not getting behind my calls for a full Rotherham-style inquiry into this issue. Because I don't understand why they wouldn't want to have a completely open and transparent investigation that understands the scale of the issue that has been going on across Bradford for many decades, understand where the real failings have happened, so that we can get some proper learning in place and provide reassurance to victims, to families, and in the in the authorities that have let them down for far too long. And we owe it to our communities to do that.
Now, in your debate last night, you had a lot of support from some of your Conservative colleagues. Where does the government stand on this issue? Do they back your calls for this inquiry?
Well, they absolutely do, and we heard that loud and clear from the dispatch box last night. The Minister responding, Rachel Maclean, clearly said that the local authority should do the moral right thing here. They have the ability to instigate a full Rotherham-style inquiry, and they should get on and do that.
So the problem is this is not within the gift of the government, it's within the gift of the council, and the council seems to have a bit of a political objection to this.
Yeah, and again, you know, this is about doing the right thing. This is not about pitching one party against the other. This is morally the right thing to do for our communities.
So we saw it was happening in Rotherham. We think it might be happening in Bradford. Is there any indication that this is a wider issue in other parts of the country as well?
Well, this isn't a case of thinking it's happening in Bradford. It absolutely is happening in Bradford. There are current live cases that are going through the Crown Court at the moment, and there have been many people who have been convicted of this, of crimes going back over the last 20 years. And I know that this is happening now. And I feel that the light limited report that only looked at 5 children that was released earlier this summer is just the tip of the iceberg. And I personally believe that if a full Rotherham-style inquiry was looked at across the Bradford district, it would be far more damning and of a much larger scale than what we saw in Rotherham.
Well, I have to say it's a courageous campaign that you're running. And just finally, what do you think are your chances of success? At what point do you think the council will listen to what you're saying and instigate this inquiry?
We all have a duty to stand up to for our communities. I hope that they are listening loud and clear. And one thing that I want to be reiterate to my constituents is that I will not let this issue drop.
Well, Robbie Moore, MP for Keighley, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. A really important issue on a day where there's lots of other big news. I think it's important to highlight. Well, we just have time for one final non-budget related thought before our bumper day of budget coverage really gets going. Yesterday, YouTube removed the account of a well-known left-wing company. A company whose employees often pop up in the media to provide incredibly left-wing talking points. Naturally, it's a company with which I rarely agree, but it's also a company that absolutely should have the right to be heard in a free society, even if many of those who work for it literally defend heinous ideologies that have caused suffering to many millions in the less free parts of the world over the last century. While the channel has been now reinstated, yesterday's events are worth briefly dwelling upon. What made me raise an eyebrow is how quickly so many on the political right called out this bizarre episode of censorship for what it was: massive overreach and a clear censorious error from YouTube. Yes, just about every right-leaning voice in the UK politics has said YouTube shouldn't have suspended that left-wing channel. In their hour of need, their political opponents came to their defence. Now, I can't help remembering the total contrast on social media when YouTube removed the channel of a radio station that many would say is on the right. The crowing, the cheering, the gloating, the delight with which that news was met by so many on the left. Contrast that with the support the left had yesterday from the right. And maybe we should take a little step back to think about what that says about the values of each group. Well, that's it from me today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys and Mercy Maroki. We'll also have extended budget coverage starting with Prime Minister's Questions at 12. Don't go anywhere, it's a bumper day. But before all of that, here's a little look at the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. Well, there's a lot of wet weather to come over the next few days. Through today, we've got some persistent rain across western parts of the UK, and it's windy and mild. And that's all down to this air coming up from the southwest. But we've got this weather front here, and that's becoming pretty persistent through the day today, not moving very quickly, very far. We've got weather warnings in place across northern England through today, but as we go into Thursday, we'll have one in for Wales as well. Let's take a look at where that rain is at the moment then. We've got some pretty heavy rain across southern Scotland and Cumbria. It's just clearing out of Northern Ireland. It's It's gradually trickling its way slowly southwards. A lot of cloud in the sky elsewhere. A few sunny breaks developing to the east of higher ground through Wednesday afternoon, but with strong winds, it will feel quite gusty around the coastal areas, despite, though, temperatures getting up to 18, that's 64 in Fahrenheit. As we go through Wednesday evening then, we'll continue to see that rain pushing its way slowly southwards, becoming heavier then across northwest Wales and eventually getting into more of Wales as we go into the early hours of Thursday. Again, ahead of it, we'll see a lot of cloud in the sky, another very mild picture over into the early hours of Thursday, but just starting to turn a little bit cooler in the far northwest of Scotland, 9 degrees there in Stornoway, 48 Fahrenheit, compared to 12 degrees there in London. Now, as we go through into Thursday, what have we got on the cards? More in the way of rain across these western areas. It really is going to persist, and I think those totals will start to build up. So expect some surface water flooding on the roads, the risk of some flash flooding as well in places. Do take care if you are planning any journeys. Still dry across southeast England through the day. Some sunshine developing here. A much, much brighter day for Northern Ireland. A few showers coming in across Scotland, and still on the mild side across the board. Now, as we go into the Halloween weekend, it stays fairly unsettled, further strong winds and the risk of some heavy rain at times too. Our temperatures begin to slide away, though, as we go into Sunday. I'll see you very soon. Take care.